So if politics is a game, then here's our game board. So what we have here is this endless cycle of citizens trying to have their voices heard by the policymakers. And so we'll see as we go that we start off with people, the different kinds of positions that they may have, the different kinds of demographics that we have in the country. And then linkage institutions are the ways that we have these kinds of people connected to the policymakers. And so later on we'll see those. So public opinion refers to the varying positions of Americans regarding politics and policy. And what we're going to see is that we have opinions on every single thing, literally every single thing, and there's always somebody who has the exact opposite opinion. And so really this is where the game starts. Everybody tries to get their own public opinion to be the loudest voice, to be the issues that people are talking about. And so, this can range from everything from presidential approval ratings to whether or not people are for proposed laws or even ideological positions. And like I said, Americans rarely have a total consensus. I mean, virtually never. There's nothing out there that we all agree on. And to say that we all share the same opinion or we all have no opinion of something is very rare and almost non-existent. So the first key term that we need to address here is political socialization. So when we say that something is being socialized, it means influenced. And so if we say political socialization, we're asking the question of where do people acquire their political beliefs? And right here we see an overview of where Americans are going to get their main sources of ideas on politics. We're going to suggest that family and culture and all the issues connected to it are one major source. The media is another source. Education is a source, and then religion or not being religious is another source. You go around the world and you're going to see different things influencing political socialization more than other things. So if you go to a place where religion is really focused upon, then you're going to see their doctrinal laws and their theology influencing people's opinions. If you go to an authoritarian state, the government and the media are going to indoctrinate their people, and that's where your opinions are going to be coming from. And so here in America, we have a little bit of lots of different sources, and we'll take them one by one. So when we look at family and culture, what we're really asking is how does your upbringing, the people in your family and your neighborhood and your community and your environment have an impact on what you believe about politics. And if we think about it, this is what a lot of people would say is the main source of socialization. A lot of times, especially when you're young, you basically believe whatever your parents believe. And that's true of politics, it's true of sports, it's true of how families should be run. And so if your parents are Republicans, you'll most likely be a Republican as well in youth. And you have this nostalgic recollection of major political events and how they shaped you and early political heroes. If you were raised in the 80s, then you remember Reagan as being a hero. Or if you were raised in the early 60s, you remember JFK as being a hero. And so that has a deep impact on what you believe about when times were good, when times were bad, what is the right opinion and wrong opinion, and so on. So we have a lot of demographic issues we can look at when we look at family and culture. And so I gave you a breakdown of the approximate numbers there of our racial makeup in the United States today. And we're absolutely obsessed with race, both as a factor in policy making, but also how we do statistics and break things down. And the fact of the matter is depending on what race you are, what ethnicity you are, that's going to have a major impact on not only how you're raised and what environment you come from, but also what the establishment of politics, the politicians, tell you should think and how they treat you. And so this has a major impact. And you get into some of the statistics and some of the scenarios that we have in our country. We have some groups that are more prone to think a certain way about politics and because of their upbringing. So for example, blacks and Hispanics are often under the poverty line more than whites and Asians. And so they're going to have different opinions on social policy and on welfare and Medicare and Medicaid than than other groups are going to have. Sure, there'll be some overlap. There are definitely blacks and Hispanics who agree with whites and Asians on various things. But generally speaking, their racial and ethnic makeup are going to have an impact on what they think. Also, gender is going to play a big role. If we look at the statistics about who men tend to support in politics and who women tend to support, we see a big gap. And we call that the gender gap, which is to say that women's concerns and goals and problems and ideas and interests are all very different than what men's are. And then, of course, there's a wide spectrum there. Another thing to consider is age. Old people vote a lot more than younger people do, and so therefore their interests tend to get heard a lot more than other people. And so if you're a politician and you want to have strong support, you better not ignore the old people, the over 65 group or the baby boomers. Class also plays a role, whether you're rich or poor or middle class. Where you live has an impact on your opinions. And so we can really lump a whole lot of stuff into this category of family and culture, and it's a major socializer of political opinions. The media also plays a big role, especially for young people. Like I said a minute ago, your family and your upbringing is going to play a big role in your early years. But then things start to happen. You start to watch TV. You start to listen to music. You start to pay attention to things that are happening around you that are presented to you on the news and on the media. And that can change your ideas about things. Everything from glorifying certain celebrities to hearing different voices from different political opinions than what you were raised with in your family. That's what the media tends to do. The media is going to broaden the horizons of a lot of youth, but also the adults can easily be influenced by the media as well. And part of the job of the media is to articulate the political issues of the day to the masses. We'll learn soon that it's more complicated than that, but that the media is definitely going to form a lot of opinions, as is education. That same kid who is going to be heavily socialized by their parents' upbringing in their household will now start to have some changes in their ideas when they start experiencing more of the mass media. Then you go to school. You start to hear more things, more different opinions, and beginning in elementary school through high school, and then you go off to college, and then you get a huge dose of new ideas. And you start to live life, and some people come full circle back to what they were taught in their upbringing. Some people go off in new directions, and that's why we have so many different opinions out there. But education, in younger years, you learn about the president, you learn about our system, and you learn the Pledge of Allegiance. And what we're trying to do in early education is make good citizens. Share with young children what their role in the system is, that this is a democracy and that they have a place in the decision-making process. And then later on, you start to talk in high school and college about more opinionated things, and you'll get professors in college who will, in graduate school, who will not give you both sides, and instead they will try to indoctrinate you on one side or the other. And everybody's that way a little bit. Religion is obviously a big factor too. If you are a religious person, this is where you get your ideas largely about morality and authority and ethics, and how you deal with other people. But not everybody, not entirely. It would be foolish to suggest that people who are not religious don't have those values as well. They just get them from other sources. Here in the United States, you're basically you're going to see people who are religious having their political opinions affected by those beliefs pretty strongly. But we also have a large part of the population that's non-religious or secular, and so that no religion is almost kind of a different religion nowadays, and so that can definitely play a role. The next thing we want to ask is, how do we measure public opinion? How do we know what people think about politics in general and on what they believe about candidates and policymakers and specific issues? And the answer is polling. Polling is a major industry in the media today. And basically, it's a survey. You may get called at your home, you may get called on your cell phone, and you'll get somebody on the other end asking you, are you a Republican or a Democrat or an independent? What do you think about such and such proposed legislation? Or if it's a presidential election year, who are you supporting in the primary? Or who are you supporting in the general election? And they do this scientifically. And this goes all the way back to George Gallup, who started this whole phenomenon back in the 30s. They use random samples, which is trying to call enough people and enough different kinds of people to represent the entire population. We have over 30 million people in the United States. You can't call every single one of them. And so you have to do a sample, which is just a couple of thousand people, if you do it scientifically, that can represent the whole population. But you have to have equal number of men and women. You have to have a certain amount of Republicans, a certain amount of Democrats, a certain amount of rich people, a certain amount of poor people and middle class people, a certain amount of black people, a certain amount of white people, a certain amount of people with education, a certain amount of people without education, different parts of the world or of the country. You have to have a sample that proportionally reflects the general population. And just a couple of thousand phone calls, and it's done scientifically, you can get to within 3% of the actual number. This is called the sampling error, and it's pretty hard to get more specific than that. But these professional pollsters have made a science of it where they can actually get really, really close, and especially on things like presidential elections, people like to look at the various polls after the election and say, oh, this poll was really close, this poll was not even close, this poll was way off. And there's some victory laps that happen with certain pollsters. Here's the impact of polls, though. What we have to understand is it does a lot more than just give us interesting facts about what public opinion says. What we need to understand is that it helps candidates and policymakers make their positions. If you know that a certain policy proposal is not very popular, then you're going to ditch it. If you know that through the public opinion polls that it's something that could potentially be a gold mine for you, then you're going to follow through with it. Also, what public opinion polls do is that they don't always reflect public opinion. A lot of times they create public opinion. And that's what we call the bandwagon effect. So, for example, in a presidential election, you may have thought to yourself early on that candidate X had no chance in the election and you were never going to vote for them because you felt like they had no shot. But then as the primaries go on, you realize, oh, wow, this person actually does have some support. They actually could win. I am going to vote for them. Without looking at the polls, you never would have changed your mind. But because you see a certain trend in the polls, you're going to jump on the bandwagon, and hence the name. We also see with the media using polls as a form of entertainment. We love talking about polls just like we love looking at sports, and Sports Center on ESPN tells us all the scores of the day, tells us about all the records that have been set and all the statistics, who had the most points on that day, what are the standings, who's in first place, who's in second place. We love that kind of stuff. It's easy to understand, and it's kind of exciting. And so we've done that to politics. This is called horse race journalism. If you watch coverage of any kind of political event, but especially elections, you're going to quickly realize that nobody really wants to talk about the candidates or the issues. What they really want to talk about is who's ahead, who is losing, who's going to win in such and such place, what does so-and-so have to do to try to win the next election, these are what the polls say, these polls are good, these polls are bad for such and such candidate. We have totally gone all in on horse race journalism because it sells. We've basically made politics like a sporting event. We love looking at numbers, and we love talking about who's ahead and who's behind. And so polls then, I think at the bottom line, we say that they reflect public opinion, but they also create a lot of public opinion, and that includes among the policymakers too, who are trying to get themselves elected. They're going to look at the polls just as much as everybody else is. Here's a list of some notable polls. Gallup, as we mentioned before, is a long-standing poll, and you've got some other ones here. We also have to realize that polls are slanted. Rasmussen, for example, is a conservative pollster, whereas Pew Research is going to be of a different orientation. Gallup is a little bit to the left. You'll also get the media doing polls. If you get a poll from Fox News, which is conservative, then you may, take that with a grain of salt. Just as if you have an MSNBC poll, which is a very liberal media outlet, then you're going to take that with a grain of salt. We also, like I said, the newspapers will run polls, the TV networks run polls. A good source that I like to look at is Real Clear Politics. What they will do is take all the reputable polls that are out there, all the scientific ones, and they'll take averages. And it's not exactly going to be perfect, but it will give you a general idea of where we are on a certain polling issue just by taking the averages. Another kind of poll is called the exit poll, and this is not really used for reflecting public opinion, but really what it is news agencies like the major network TV newscast will do exit polls when an election is happening. If you've ever wondered how on election night, with only like 5% of the votes counted, they can declare somebody to be the winner of a primary or an election. The reason they can do that is because they've already taken exit polls. So when you go and vote and you walk out of the building, there's somebody there who's a pollster asking you, so how did you vote? And you tell them. And they're doing this all over the country in big numbers. And so they're reporting back to their news agencies saying, well, our numbers tell us that that this person's going to win the election pretty easily because they're way ahead. And this is way before the official vote count has been completed. So the newscasts always want to be the first ones to report the results of an election. And so therefore they heavily rely on these exit polls to do that. They also have entrance polls if it's a different kind of election called a caucus that we'll get to later. But it's about entertainment and it's about information equally. And so that's what exit polls and entrance polls do. So now the bread and butter here is where we get down to the point where we articulate political ideologies. So you see the word idea in there. So really we're talking about a coherent set of values and beliefs about public policy, what a particular person's ideas are on politics. And what we also like to do in American politics and just about everywhere in the world is we like to package our ideas into a coherent system. Okay? And so we have two main political ideologies who will take all their individual positions and issues on things and package them together under one label. Liberals, in the modern sense, we refer to as the left, because they're on the left of the political spectrum, generally are going to support a wider scope of government and government programs in order to achieve equality in society. So they may have all kinds of positions on all various issues, and we can pull our hair out trying to figure those out and spend day and night listing all the positions. But it's a lot easier just to package everything under the idea of liberals like a wider scope of government because they feel like we have problems in society that need to be addressed, and the best one to do that in terms of fairness and to promote equality is for the government to be the ones making major decisions and promoting our goals. Now you have to pay for all that, so you're going to have higher taxes, primarily on the wealthy. Okay. Another thing I'll add to this is that liberals also believe in expansive civil rights, meaning that people should be able to engage in the privileges of the political system. They believe in various protections for certain kinds of people, again, in order to achieve equality in society. Conservatives, on the other hand, are going to promote a smaller scope of government. They believe also that there are problems in society, but the government is not the best one to address those problems because government are made up of human beings who are flawed and are out for power and influence and wealth. And therefore, to address the ills of society, we need government out of the way. We need the private sector, or what we might call the civil society, to address the problems of society. So for example, if we're talking about poverty, the liberals going to say government needs to take tax dollars and financially support these people in poverty with jobs programs, government housing, subsidized health care, or to have a supplemented income. Whereas conservatives are going to say, get government out of the way, and therefore we can lower taxing and spending. People can keep money in their pocket. This is going to allow organizations and businesses to expand, create more job opportunities, and that person in poverty can get a job and pay their own bills. And you get into lots of different kinds of issues, and there's differing opinions on where we draw the line between liberal and conservative. And we may even articulate a third position, which is a moderate. You're somewhere in between these things. So a moderate might say, we believe in the liberal viewpoint that we need to achieve equality in society, and we believe that government should do that to some degree, but we also believe that the conservatives are correct, that we need to be more fiscally responsible. We need to spend less money. We're in huge debt because we can't afford to pay all these bills for all these government programs. So maybe there should be a little bit of government for some things, and the private sector should do things in others. So we'll spend a lot more time looking at these different systems of thought. These are really the two teams that everybody plays for. And we could file every single organization, person, business, politician, they can all be filed under these two teams. And we'll see that the whole entire policymaking system hinges on an understanding of these two teams. You either play for the left or you play for the right. Speaking of which, who tends to play for the liberals? And we can make sense of all of these. Younger people tend to be more liberal, whereas minorities and women and the poor all tend to be liberals, as do the intellectual elite, people who are wealthy but are in the business of ideas, like professors and lawyers and union leaders and Hollywood. Minorities who are Catholic, Jews, atheists, and non-religious people tend to be liberals. Residents of big cities and people who live on the coasts, whether it be the West Coast or the left coast as they call it, or New England, and also the Southwest and places like New Mexico tend to be, to a degree, liberal. Conservatives are more likely to be older folks, but not entirely. The corporate elite, these are wealthy people who are not in the business of ideas, but they're most likely to be in finance, Wall Street type guys. Military personnel, Protestants, residents of small towns, and people in the South and the Plains and Midwest, Appalachia, these various regions, they all tend to be conservative in nature. Okay, so we'll articulate this a little bit more as we go, but these would be the basic layout of the two teams.